Funding for The Art Economist is supported by viewers like you. Thank you. Let me ask you something. Do immigrants steal jobs? If you have any familiarity with basic economics, your answer is no. Workers are also consumers. More people in an economy means more spending, more demand, more business, more jobs created downstream. The lump of labor fallacy, the idea that there's only a fixed number of jobs to go around and every new worker takes one, gets debunked in the first week of any intro economics course. This is not a controversial heterodox position. This is Econ 101. So what I find genuinely absurd is that the same indie developer who would correctly walk you through labor market expansion without breaking a sweat, who knows, intellectually, that economic activity is not zero-sum, will turn around and tell you that X game selling millions of copies on Steam is bad for small developers, that a breakout indie hit is eating their players, that there's only so much room in the market, and every big success is taking a slice that smaller games needed to survive. This is the same lump of labor fallacy. The fixed pie fallacy is what economists call a zero-sum assumption applied to a non-zero-sum system. You see it everywhere people talk about creative industries. Musicians insisting that Spotify's top artists eat the streams. Indie filmmakers insisting that Marvel is killing cinema. And yes, indie developers insisting that every breakout hit is a competitor rather than a collaborator. The assumption is that the market is a pie, mercantilist of sorts, sliced. And every big slice someone else takes is a slice that you don't get. But here's the thing about markets specifically, they are not pies. They are more like fires. A bigger fire does not starve smaller fires of oxygen. It creates more heat, more light, more people standing around it wondering what else is burning. And what I'm trying to say is that somehow, the moment we're talking about indie games instead of labor markets, the fixed pie fallacy comes roaring back. So, we're going to take a look at what happens when a big indie actually succeeds, because the evidence, when you stop assuming and start observing, is quite damning. Let's talk about a game called OFF. OFF was made in 2008 by a Belgian developer named Mortist Ghost. RPG maker, freeware, weird, French even. It had a modest cult following for years, circulating through niche corners of the internet, eventually translated from French by fans in 2011. The kind of game that spreads by word of mouth between people who are already looking for something strange. Then, Undertale came out in 2015. Now, under the fixed pie assumption, Undertale, a similarly strange RPG with subversive combat mechanics and heavy emotional weight, would cannibalize OFF's audience. After all, players only have so much time. If they are playing Undertale, they are not looking for OFF. There is only so much room for this kind of game. Here is what actually happened. Undertale creator Toby Fox has publicly acknowledged OFF as one of his direct inspirations, alongside Mother 2, Yume Nikki, and Cave Story. He later contributed music to the official OFF remaster, released in 2025. The remaster got critical coverage across major games outlets. Undertale fans were specifically cited as the target audience. A game made in 2008 by a solo Belgian developer got a commercial re-release, new bosses, new content, and a fan gaming publishing deal 17 years later. Undertale did not compete with OFF. It created a category. It gave players vocabulary for what they were looking for. Games that use RPG conventions unconventionally, that make you feel something about the mechanics themselves, turning off the light and all that. And once players had that vocabulary, they went looking for predecessors. This is what economists call a positive externality. Whenever a large company does R&D research, the entire research is not captured by entirely private gains. It is a benefit that spills over to parties who were not part of the original transaction, such as the institutional capital leaving to make their own setup. Undertale sold its copies. Undertale's players, newly primed for the genre, went looking upstream, and OFF was there. Mortis Ghost did not pay for any of that. Undertale did it for free, entirely by existing and succeeding. The retroactive spotlight does not work backwards. Doesn't just work backwards, it works sideways. When Undertale exploded, it did not just revive older games, it validated an entire mode of game development. The quirky RPG framework that you see time and time again. Games that took emotional risks. The signal that went out to the market wasn't that there was only room for one of these, it was the fact that there was now an audience to consume these markets. Find them. Slay the Spire launched in Steam Early Access in 2017 and hit full release in 2019. It was not the first card game. It was not the first roguelike. There was even a rough predecessor, Dream Quest by Peter Whalen in 2014, that fused the two concepts. But Slay the Spire was the first game to make that fusion feel inevitable, natural, obvious in retrospect, and what happened next was not that it cornered the market on card-based roguelikes. What happened was that a market for card-based roguelikes suddenly existed. Monster Train, Rogue Book, Inscription, Vault of the Void, Cobalt Core, and in 2024, Balatro, a poker-themed deck builder from solo developer called Local Thunk, hit 5 million units sold by January 2025, was profitable within its first hour on sale, and crossed $1 million in revenue within 8 hours of launch. None of these games exist in their current commercial form without Slay the Spire, not because they copied it, several are mechanically very different, but because Slay the Spire proved to platforms and publishers and players that this was a real genre. It drew the map. It built the road, even. Before Slay the Spire, a developer pitching a card-based roguelike had to explain what it was, justify why it was interesting, and convince someone to take a chance on an untested premise. After Slay the Spire, you just said the words, deck-building roguelike. The category existed. The audience is now pre-educated. And the market grew accordingly. Roguelikes on Steam generated around $400 million in revenue in 2025 alone, up 80% from 2024, which in of itself was already a record year for the genre. Slay the Spire 2 launched in early access in March of 2026 and sold 3 million copies in its first week. But here's the important thing, the rising tide lifted other boats. The success of the genre leader did not compress the space available for everyone else, it expanded it. This is genre creation as a public good. Slay the Spire's success was a piece of shared infrastructure that every developer in its wake got to build on for free. The genre leader does not capture all of its value. It cannot. It will diffuse across every game that follows, every developer who benefits from a pre-educated audience, every algorithm that now surfaces deck builder roguelike as a real, searchable category. Let's zoom out for a second because the individual examples do not fit in a vacuum. In the first 9 months of 2024, indie games generated nearly $4 billion in gross revenue on Steam, 48% of all full game revenue on the platform. That is the first time indie games have come close to matching AA and AAA games in raw revenue, and that shared has since doubled since 2018. Now, you could look at those numbers and say, sure, but that's because of a few giant hits sucking up at all the oxygen. And you would be partly right. The top of the market is increasingly concentrated. But here's the thing, all sectors grew. The AAA games grew. The middle market grew. The small teams grew. Hobbyists grew. The pie got bigger for almost everyone. The rising water level was not just a metaphor, it is a measurable impact on independent developers. A side note is that most of the time, creative ventures already follow a power law distribution anyway. The consequence of removing an incumbent that was large does not mean that the revenue will suddenly get distributed onto everybody else. The revenue will most likely just not be there. So what is the practical takeaway of all of this? If you are a small developer, the existence of a big, successful indie in your genre is not your enemy. It is probably the most valuable piece of market infrastructure you have access to. It has already done the hardest work, proving to players that games like yours are worth buying. The competitive threat isn't Undertale or Slay the Spire or Balatro or Vampire Survivors. The competitive threat is invisibility. The competitive threat is making a game that has no successful predecessors to point to, no established audience to tap, no vocabulary for players to use when they try to tell their friends why they should care. The competitive threat is being first in a genre that nobody knows that they want yet. A rising tide lifts all boats. But in entertainment markets specifically, successful games create the water. None of this means that success is guaranteed, of course. The market creates opportunity, not outcome. And the unseen costs, the game that never find their audience despite the healthy genre, are real. But that is not what is being debated by myself right now. The question is whether big successful indie games are good for the ecosystem or bad for it. And structurally, the answer is clear. They are not eating your players, they are creating players. The fixed pie fallacy persists because the loss feels immediate and visible. The players who bought Undertale instead of your game, you can imagine them. You can feel the absence of that sale. But what you can't see, what Bastiat would call the unseen, is the player who found your genre because Undertale existed. The streamer who covered your game because the category had heat. The algorithm that surfaced your title to something already searching in that space. The remaster deal that a 2008 freeware developer got 17 years later because the genre his game helped invent finally had a name. The seen is competition, but the unseen is market creation. Independent artists who internalize the fixed pie fallacy don't simply misread the market, they then misread their own interests. They will advocate against the very conditions that make their work findable. A bigger indie success is not a threat to your slice of the pie. It is proof that the pie is bigger than you thought. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Art Economist. I will see you guys next time. Peace out.